ahead and look at the camera.
Got
Take
it.
a deep breath and go ahead and go.
Okay. Here we go. Hello, I'm Dick McLean. My wife Marcia and I have a company called Tell Your Story, which, as it sounds, is a company that helps people narrate their life story, whether it be an autobiography, a biography, or a memoir. The reason I'm here is I'm with Jim Miller. Jim is from Geyserville, which is north of Santa Rosa in Sonoma County. And what Jim is going to do is to share his work, his poetry with us. And Jim, it's great to see you. How are you? How have you been?
Thank you.
That's
Thank
good.
you.
That's good. Here's the story of a beginning. Jim and I began working together. And it became obvious when working together with Jim's biography that Jim determined that his biography was not a traditional narrative, but it could be told in poems. And from those poems, he could create a poetic biography, which is very rare, and also, in Jim's case, very honest. We began working together, Jim and myself, and worked very hard. That Jim burnished these, rewrote them. Some of these poems were from years before, but each of these poems had an emotional moment connected to them in his life, and he could express that. But then, as a far more mature craftsman, he went back and made revisions, etc., so they could be polished to where they should be. And when he was done, we made a book. And here is the book right here, called Going Off the Pavement. And it is already getting marvelous press. As a matter of fact, Matthew Fox, who was the leading theological philosophers, read the book and was so pleased with it. Now, Matthew Fox, mind you, published 40 books. And among them, what were they, Jim?
Well, there are many, but the Original Blessing, Reinvention of Work, there are many. I think he has 30 books.
And then, yes, but just marvelous, marvelous poet and writer, but mainly a writer. And this is what Matthew Fox said about this book. And I read, "This book speaks to the deep longings and journeys that men take as they navigate their soul adventures. It speaks to the pain and the rage and the grief, and also to the beauty and joy and power of compassion that is in all of us. Great poems, great pictures, great wisdom from an elder to any men open to listening and still in love with life." My God, what a wonderful, wonderful kudo to a fine piece of work. Before we begin, Jim, tell us about yourself.
Well, I was born in Los Angeles and was raised in Pasadena, San Marino, and had an old family, and which started very early in life, and I became very painfully bound to this highly dysfunctional family, and so I went through a lot of hell and pain, which has taken a long time to work through and see the results of going inner work. But I went to a boys' school, which I hated, and then I went to University of Michigan for 2 years, which I enjoyed. Then I came back for 4 years at Berkeley, and fell in love with their learning, just at Berkeley, really fell in love with learning. And it was there I took a course in Japanese literature, and which turned me on to Japanese poetry. And I realized I had that same spark within me. And then I took a trip around the world instead of getting a PhD degree, which they wouldn't let me do in the combination. And a friend of mine said, "Jim, on your trip, see your mountain from its plane." Well, a year later, I was sitting on a train coming into Sendai and saw this reflection of a volcano in a rice paddy, and it snapped on me. I wanted to come home and live in the country, so that's what I did. And I've been there for 49 years. I started with sheep and then some cows and then finally some grapes. And now my son and daughter-in-law have a nice little winery and selling their wine and their verjuice out. And she just got back from a tour in China, which was very, very positive with her products, verjuice and saba, which is all products made from grapes. And but I've been there a long time and seen a lot of changes and realized that in between that time I was able to take off and go to men's retreats, and which was either in Hawaii or down in Ojai with Robert Bly, and so it started opening up doors.
And Jim, tell me, who was this book directed to?
It's directed to men who are still on a journey. Life is a journey, and sometimes it's external, sometimes it's internal. And I think the inside journey, the inside route, is where the riches are. And it's a matter of the book is really for men and some women who are looking within.
That's interesting. I know that you've studied with Ansel Adams, and I know that you studied Japanese poetry. What was the role of photography in this book and in your life?
I've done photography for many, many years, way before I ever got into writing poetry, and I've loved it. It's a medium by which you can see and focus on things, and then eventually began giving me images back in terms of poetry, like the wounded tree, and there was just a rich resource for me to pick up from the images in the photographs, poetry.
I see. But I'll tell you, Jim, though, in reading this, you were extraordinarily honest. But what you talk about is you show a great deal of pain and a great deal of grief, and you lay it out very openly. Did you hesitate, think about doing this?
No, it came flowing. I think being honest with myself was a major turning point, and being honest with my feelings, which I was not as a kid, and putting it out on paper was something that came very, very normal, very, very easy.
Interesting. When your poetry was a vehicle, why did you use the title for the book, Going Off the Pavement?
It was, that title comes from an image that was picked up in Los Angeles on the off-ramp from 405 to Sunset Boulevard. And I saw this wiggly line, and as I was going around the curve, and it snapped back at me that my life had been like that. It had been a wiggly line, and I'd sort of lost connection to the real line, the straight line, because I'd been doing that all my life, and this all of a sudden made me open my eyes to, gee, I have been on a crazy curve.
Oh, that's interesting. Would you like to read Going Off the Pavement now?
Sure. Going off the pavement. What do I do when the center line of my life, the one I have followed so faithfully for decades, buckles and drops off, changes direction or goes into an unexpected curve with some unfamiliar wiggles that shakes me to the core? Do I gobble down the pills that will smooth the outside surface without healing the inside pavement? Or seek a new highway with a new center line onto a new road that becomes my odyssey of a life's journey to find myself?
Wow. It's very moving in its bleakness. How about, there's another one I liked. It was what's it called? Is About My Limp. Would you read that one?
About my what?
About my limp.
My limp, the small pebble beneath my soul that interferes with my walking through the landscape of my life, is but that early childhood wound, still carried yet denied beneath my soul.
Wow. With your study in Japan and your study of American poets, how did they influence you? And why did you call the center line of your book as an entry? Why did you pick that?
Because I think we all have a center line. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't. And there are things that in my life, there's a lot of pain in my early life that later when I was a little more mature and had spent some time in therapy, I began to see it, and that I needed to see a center line in my life and something that was in the core, and that came from deep inner work.
I noticed in your foreword you gave great mention to the breakthrough that you received when you began to work with Robert Bly. Who were the poets that you find that influenced you?
Well, there are many, many poets. Basho is one, a Japanese, very famous Japanese poet. Hafiz is another. Robert Bly's poetry, Mary Oliver's poetry, and then of course Rumi is wonderful to read. There's a lot of poets, but Mary Oliver is one of my favorites, and Robert Bly he really opened my eyes to a different level of poetry.
Would you go on? The men's movement has been at times controversial. Would you talk about what it is and why it's important?
I think the men's movement for me has been breaking down barriers and prejudices that I've had from childhood regarding my father. My father was highly dysfunctional and not very loving, and I wrote a lot of poems about that has inspired men to make comments. But I think the men's movement made people wake up, because men were as I found out, my father was never available. And I think as a father myself, I always made myself available. And I think I have a son who's much more grounded than I was. And it's being able to change the direction, which is happening nationally. Fathers are looking for another role model to see how they can be deeper and more connected.
Where do the meetings and the myth structure enter into the men's movement?
Oh, it's the getting into drumming, getting into the stories. Robert Bly would tell stories. The most famous one is Iron John, which I've heard many times. And so the stories hold myths and ways by which to change thinking, which is, I think, important for men, particularly today, because men are beginning to open up to what we have been doing that has not been healthy for ourselves and our families.
Well, yes, we see that, very interestingly, that in the 21st century, men are redefining themselves in terms of their relationship with their friends, with their family, and especially with their sons. Now, I note that you called the center section of your work Reentry. Why did you do that?
Because in doing inner work, you have to go down into the dark. I forget his name, the Dante, Infernal.
Yeah.
And that sort of is a spark as to going down deep into the dark corners. Then you come back up with more light and more serenity, and you're able to, as I was, to start writing poetry or having a sense of re-entry back from the dark into the light.
Oh, that's marvelous. All right. What poem would you say is the best way of typifying the re-entry process?
Well, you want me to read it?
Get Naked. I think Get Naked is the name of it.
Well, there are two poems that I would consider.
There it is.
This is Getting Naked. Hurry, hurry, step out of your clothes. Drop those masks, unneeded props and airs, even all the fake jewelry you've been wearing for decades, and step into your silky skin, the one you were born with and knows how to love. We'll come together naked. Don't worry about being seen, as no one will see us that way, because all their heavy clothes blinds their eyes and imprisons their loving. Loving will do, because is there anything else that better frees the soul?
It's marvelous. There's another one there about in the reentry. Will you read Many Moons for me?
Many moons. The many moons that have carried bits and pebbles of bygone times tucked safely in the ribs of an old, old log are still moving across the clear sky, waiting for the log to settle in and reveal the beauty of its journey.
Tell me the story behind that.
Well, I saw it go out of one of the men's retreats that I went to from the Redwood Men's Council in Santa Rosa. And there was this log, this beautiful log that had all these pebbles ingrained, embedded in the ribs of the tree, and it was very inspiring. So this is the poem that came out of my inside, looking at this old wonderful log.
And I remember you told me, you said that it reminded you of all the pebbles and junk that you had picked up along the way, had become embedded, and that you had to release it. Okay, how about, you seem to be very involved in tree trunks. I think maybe Jim is your age, but anyway, would you read Tree Trunk for us?
Sure. The tree trunk. Here stands this wounded tree, showing the world its scars, deep and peeling in its pain. Or is the illusion in our eyes of a tree that became so full of its essence that its heart burst wide open, revealing to the world its inner beauty of love? Can we do the same and allow our love to burst forth?
That's interesting. I remember, Jim, you told me that you didn't really discover that until you came home and saw the picture.
Right.
And realized that what was there.
The picture inspired the poem.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's a matter of going off the edge and all of a sudden letting the energy come into words and feelings.
That's great. All right, now, within the book, we have 3 sections. One is De Profundis, about the bad times, Reentry, and then why did you call the last section Coming Home?
That's better expressed in several poems, but it's basically at a certain age one does mature and gain a wisdom that one doesn't have at 30. And the coming home was basically a metaphor for coming back into a loving state with poetry, and particularly my son.
Can you read Single Source for us? The first one. There it is. That's Absolution. Single source, let me see if I can find it for you. Single source is, I believe, here. 7. Okay. Never works. There we go. Would you read Single Source for us?
Now this is one of my favorites. Single source. We do not kneel at the same altar. We do not tend the same garden. We do not drink from the same well. Yet the water that nourishes us all springs from the same sacred source.
That's marvelous. That's marvelous. And you'd mentioned that in your wandering you had dealt with so many philosophical systems and physical disciplines that you suddenly saw it was all one. And the single source, helped you to define that. I see the next poem is called Absolution. Tell me the story behind Absolution. Tell me the story first before you read it, behind Absolution.
Well, let me look at it.
It's in this book here. Oops, it's in the 3rd book. Okay, there it is. There it is. There we go, Absolution.
This is a poem that came out of a retreat at Pahala, the temple, Wood Valley Temple in Pahala in the Big Island of Hawaii. where I went on several winters on a retreat with quite a few guys, and Doug Von Koss was the leader of it. And every morning we would sing, and this was a very new thing for me, but just being with my brothers and being able to forgive and see the forgiving that I had to do. And this is the poem. Forgiving myself is the song I sing today. A morning chant with my brothers brings an inner vibration resonating higher, from which my myopic vision disappears. Letting love's light come through and touch me, healing early wounds, healing in forgiveness. It leads me to the guest house of my inner being, where someone special has been waiting.
I remember when you described that to me, you said that it was like having the most important person in your life, yourself, saying, Jimmy, it's okay, it's all forgiven. And you found yourself as both the priest and the penitent to rid yourself of it. That's great. Okay, now, of all the poems, what is your favorite poem and why?
That's the one for my son.
And why?
When he was born, I realized I was not going to do to him what was done to me. I made a very strong endeavor to keep a lively energy between he and I. And so I was inspired by his beauty and his maturity as a boy and as he grew up. And this is this is a poem that I really was inspired by his growth. And it's entitled For My Son. What a garden grows inside you. There's been deep cultivation and all that tender tending, while a full moon lights your path. You're a blessing that bows its head to honor that work to form the blooms that are coming forth from the beauty you are.
And Jim, you told me that you felt that the heritage of the unfortunate relatives had finally been stopped. And you could in turn see the beauty and see the result of it in your grandchildren. Tell me about them.
Well, it's families, American families, families anywhere, pass down dysfunctionalities. And my family had generations of dysfunctionalities. And so by doing my homework and doing some meditation and some parenting classes, I was able to lighten myself as I saw myself and lighten my load. It didn't get passed down. And as a cousin said, when she dies, she wants on her tombstone, all family shit stops here. and
it is manifested in the happy, free-spirited children.
Very free.
Tell me how do they greet you?
Oh, loves and kisses and hugs.
What does Elsa love?
I'm not with you.
Tic-tac-toe.
Oh, tic-tac-toe, yeah. I introduced her to the game of tic-tac-toe, and she comes up and says, oh, Grandpa, we have to play. And she's very good, very good. I've tried to get to her 3D tic-tac-toe, which is 3 different levels. And she hasn't quite mastered that yet, but there's she's a lot of fun to play with.
And who attacks you?
Oh, Leif, he's all boy, all boy.
Oh, good. Well, listen, thank you, Jim. Thank you very much and also, Jim, for giving us and you, the readers, so much of yourself. I find that so many poets mask their message and hide behind it and let people try to figure it out. And you lay it all right out there. Not always pretty, but I think extraordinarily honest and sometimes very beautiful.
Honesty is the root of beauty.
I hope so. Okay. You can go on you can find this book, Going Off the Pavement. You can get it on the internet. Just type in Going Off the Pavement and click and it will come up. And there you'll see Jim's website with additional information on it. And if you'd like to share his poems with some of his friends, just click on it. And there are 9 poems on there read by Jim, who likes reading poetry. And on the other hand, if you would like to know more about Tell Your Story, that Marcia McLean and myself host, you can go here to Tell Your Story, or That's where, or you can email us, or you can telephone. Area code 415-883-7901. And thank you, good friends, for looking. This has been delightful for us. And thank you, Jim, for taking the time and being so honest with us.
Thank you for your direction and help along the way.
Very good. Thank you. That went very well.
Yeah, I think honesty is very important.
Okay, we're capturing.
All right, you ready to roll?
Go ahead. Ready to
Okay.
roll anytime you are.
Here we go. Hello, my name is Dick McLean. My wife, Marcia McLean, and myself have a business called Tell Your Story. And what we are personal historians. And we help people narrate their lives, whether it be an autobiography, a biography, or even a memoir. And that what we do here is, talking with James Miller, who is a local poet. And it is grand to see you again, Jim. How are you?
Thank you, Dick.
Good to see
be
you.
here.
Okay. Let me tell you about how we began working together. And that was, we had originally thought about doing a straight narrative, working with him to shape his story. But along the way, James shared with us his vast archives of poetry. And they were very interesting because these poems represented so many pivotal points in his life that Jim finally looked up and said, hey, this is my autobiography. My autobiography is in poems, and I want to tell my autobiography in poems. And what was the result? This book. This book was the result of that. And what has happened is that this book has gotten very great press, and I'd like to read to you. Matthew Fox, who is probably the leading philosopher of New Age theology, read this. His books include, Jim?
Well, The Original Blessing, which is
Original
very
Blessing.
famous. Reinvention of Work. He has about 20 some odd books. And then his last book, which was really juicy, was The Pope's War.
Interesting. And the, for instance, Original Blessing sold 400,000 copies. I mean, very, very mainstream. So anyway, here's what Matthew Fox said about going off the pavement. This book speaks to the deep longings and journey that men take as they navigate their soul adventures. It speaks to the pain and grief and rage, but also to the beauty and joy and power of compassion that is in all of us. Great poems, great pictures, great wisdom from an elder to any men open to listening and still in love with life. Just wonderful, wonderful praise here. Now, before we get started, tell us about yourself, Jim.
Well, I was born in Los Angeles and grew up in Pasadena, San Marino, and from a very old, prominent family, but full of dysfunctions. And so my parents died very early, so in my 20s I was at Berkeley. From high school, I went to University of Michigan for 2 years, which I enjoyed, and then came out to Berkeley for 4 years at the university. And that's when I really discovered education. I loved it, really loved it. And what really was, at that time, a very important start was taking a Japanese literature course, and I fell in love with poetry that was 1,000 years old from the Han period. And I didn't start writing then, but the inspiration, the fire, the spark sort of was in the corner for a while. And then not until I really started traveling that I started to see poetry coming out.
Who do you think is the audience for this book, Jim?
Oh, many people who carry their wounds, carry their scars in denial. I think my honesty has brought forth an inspiration for a lot of people, can be an inspiration for a lot of people to look within or to continue their inner journeys, which a lot of people are doing.
Jim, you also talk about pain and grief, and you expose a lot of yourself Many poets won't do that. Do you have any regrets?
None whatsoever. It's very freeing when you reveal your inner self and the shadows and pains and scars that we all carry.
Tell me now about why the unusual title for the book, Going Off the Pavement.
Oh, that was a wonderful image when I was down in Los Angeles taking on 405, there was an off-ramp to Sunset Boulevard, and I noticed the center line was sort of wiggly and not straight, and sort of inspired the image within that my life was not totally straight, that I had been following a straight line all my life and being afraid of the wiggly line, which came and looked at me square in the face, and I got the inspiration to write the poem.
Okay, you wrote in the book is divided into 3 sections: De Profundis, Reentry, and Coming Home. Why did you label it as such?
Really, it's the De Fundis is the dark side of life, working into the dark canyons, following Dante's Inferno, revealing the dark, the real dark, the pain. And from the pain comes a light that then brought me a little lighter and a little more open to coming into another level.
So you call that Reentry?
Reentry. And then the final one was basically the blossoming of my, being free of my pain and my way of holding myself back instead of flowering out.
Would you read us, I mean, one of the early poems, they're almost painful. Would you read De Profundis?
Yeah. De Profundis. Fall into the pit, be absorbed in its darkness. Fear it? Let the fear be your key. The deeper darkness yet, the deeper you go, the closer one gets to the real light residing at the bottom of your inner darkness. There and only there are the keys to all the doors and all the locks to the missing love.
Wow, wow. All right, do you want us to go on, proceed from there? Is there something else that you want?
Let's just wing it with your other 2 favorite poems.
Okay.
Okay, stand by.
I'll take it.
Okay, reset camera 4.
It's funny how you redo something and you can never do it again exactly the way
Yeah, you never can.
Because that's our artistic side, yours and mine.
Yeah.
It flows.
Yeah.
It's like a waterfall.
Like a waterfall.
Okay. All right.
We're ready to start whenever
Okay.
you are. Stand by till I close the door.
Which we're going to do?
You're going
Go
to
ahead now.
read your 5 favorite poems.
Take a breath.
All right. Jims, tell me, what are your favorite poems? What I know that these are popular for you, but tell me the poems that you take special joy in.
Well, this is one, The Road Oft Traveled. This rocky road I have traveled, the many potholes I have fallen into. Again and again that deep lesson, to grow up and claim my true power. Becoming a man has not been an easy street, but the scars I wear are like the flowers blooming in my heart.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And the other that you wanted to read?
Lost and Found. Go take a walk, hike the mountains, sail the oceans, fish the streams, pick a few flowers, but get totally lost in whatever path you take. Only in getting lost does the big trail reveal itself. Another favorite of mine is for my son. What a garden grows inside you. There's been deep cultivation and all that tender tending while a full moon lights your path. You're a blessing that bows its head to honor that work to form the blooms that are coming forth from the beauty you are.
Oh, that's marvelous. All right, now we will do some. You want to read another one?
Sure, I love a poem.
Jim reads poems at the drop of a hat, good friends.
3 questions. Oh, the abundance we live in, the blessings that are bestowed. Why do we reject their embracing light? Is it those little childhood murders that have left on our adult lives too many unmarked tombstones in the landscape of one short precious life? Do our shadows hold the keys to unlocking our inner guarded prisons that hold our ancient eternal yearning?
Wow, wow.
Now we're going to just do the intros.
Okay.
I forgot to bring a book of this. Can I have one? I'll give you another one.
Okay.
The inventory is getting low.
We will now begin. Hello, I'm Dick McLean. What?
Stop. We had a control room glitch.
Okay,
Okay. Count to 10 and then start again.
I'll start again. Hello, I'm Dick McLean. My wife Marcia and myself have a company called Tell Your Story, which, as the name suggests, is a company that helps people tell the narrative of their lives, whether it be a biography, autobiography, or a memoir. And we work in our work with Jim Miller, who we have here with us. We discovered that in working with Jim, that his narrative was really a poetic narrative. And here's how it happened. Each of the poems that he had resurrected from his archives touched on an emotional moment in his life. And the whole arc of these poems told a life, from its good parts to its middle parts to its bad parts. And Jim decided that he would tell his autobiography strictly in poems. And thus was the beginning of this book called Going Off the Pavement, a poetic autobiography. Good. All right, I think that's enough. It takes the opening. I tell you, you're looking for a two-shot, and it's. We're here with Jim Miller. It's grand to see you, Jim.
Good to be here,
We
Dick.
certainly enjoyed working with you. All right, now we're going to cut to the close. That opening was not great. Jim, thank you for giving us and the readers so much of yourself, and certainly good luck on the book. If you're interested and want to get the book, go to the internet and just type in Going Off the Pavement, and there you will be at the website for the poem and the book. And if you like, you can hear Jim read selected poems, as well as learn more about him with his autobiography. And now, thank you very much for viewing. If you want to get in touch with Tell Your Story, you can email us, or if you like, you can call us at 415-883-7901. Thanks again for watching. Now we'll go to the two inner segments which you can use. We start again. Hello, we're back again. We're here with James Miller, who's sharing with us his adventures in writing Going Off the Pavement. We're delighted to have him with us. Hello, Jim. Hello.
Hi, Dick.
Hello. This is Dick McLean again. We now move on to the third segment of Going Off the Pavement, our interview with the local poet, James Miller, and his very popular book, Going Off the Pavement. And now, James Miller is going to read another poem that he wants to tell us about.
This is a poem that symbolizes a lot of my travels. Spent youth. My youth is gone, spent so foolishly. Now as I go about not so foolishly, protecting what is left, I see what's gone, the glitter and the toys, those garish ornaments. But what does remain is pure and precious gold.
That's marvelous. That's marvelous.
You want another one?
Sure, do another one.
This is another one I like. All aboard. When one forgives completely, thoroughly, heartfully, be prepared for the coming freight train, delivering joy and freedom in amounts one has never known.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, tell me what you want. Do you want to do the...
We will have 10 more tape minutes.
Okay, good.
Count to 10 and go.
1, 2, 3. Jim, I know that you studied poetry in Japan, and I also know how much Robert Bly's work affected you. Do you want to talk about Robert Bly and the men's movement?
Yeah, Dick, way back in the early 80s, I went to a retreat at the Ojai Foundation and with Robert Bly and Michael Meade. And I had never been in a men's group before. I was kind of homophobic and very rigid and not involved as I am through the last 20, 30 years. And that sort of opened my eyes, and when I started leaving, I began crying because I really was crying for the loss of my father, who had died when I was 23, 24. And, but in that start was the start of joining, going to a retreat up in Mendocino with Robert and Michael Meade, and then other retreats in San Francisco with the Golden Gate Men's Council. And it went on for about 20 years, and it began to really open me to working on myself.
Jim, what was the essence of Robert Bly's message?
Well, I think it can be summed up in his wonderful reading of the myth of Iron John, which is really a story for men, for boys and men, and realize there's some loopholes or deep holes in my psyche from growing up in a dysfunctional family. And
you were deprived of a father, you said?
No, my father was there, but he just wasn't there. A lot of men will talk about how the father was there, but not available, and was not close to them. A lot of men grow up not even knowing who their father is, or, I mean, spiritually. And that, I think, Robert Bly has changed that.
And what about the myths and the ceremonies connected with the men's movement?
Well, there are many, and life is around myths. The great stories of the past are done in the oral tradition through myths, telling stories around that. And there are many stories and poems. I think for me, the poems are the ones that strike the best, and the one that I like the best is by William Stafford, The Darkness Around Us is Deep. And it's just, there's a lot to learn from different people. And for me, the opening with Robert Bly and learning poetry and reading poetry that I had not heard of before, that opened my consciousness to something that was deeper and that was there available for me to dig out, go into.
Also, on your website, Jim, there is page 6. And on that page 6, if they click on it, will take them to the foreword of the book, which is a very rich background and expresses again so much of the pain that you went through.
My early life was very painful. But I've learned to turn the pain into a garden, into a compost. And the more you compost your garden, the more the flowers bloom.
All right, now I'll go to the close again. Let me get this, read that here. Okay.
Yeah, there's some key words. Compost is a very important one.
Okay, here we go. Okay, camera 1. Here we go. Thank you for joining us. We've certainly enjoyed this. If you want to learn more about going off the pavement and learn where you want to get it, then simply go here. You can get there by just typing "going off the pavement" and you will immediately be directed right there. And it has been delightful being with you. And if you should be looking for Tell Your Story, we can be reached here in Marin County at 415-883-7901. Marcia McLean and myself would love to talk with you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Okay.
Okay, continue capturing. What I'd like you to say is, please find the book at goingoffthepavement.com.
Okay.
Okay?
That's more direct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, count to 3 and go.
1, 2, 3. Please find the book at goingoffthepavement.com.